The O.J. Simpson trial was known as the crime and trial of the century for the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. Though O.J. was found innocent of the charges by a jury, there's a whole lot of people who are convinced he was guilty. Just before the murders and after the divorce, Nicole Brown Simpson was dating Keith 𝐊𝐿𝐴𝐻, and O.J. was none too happy about that. In a brand new book called Stalked, Keith finally reveals to the world 31 years later what it was like to actually be stalked by O.J. and how it could have been him. Welcome to the Motivation Show, Keith 𝐊𝐿𝐴𝐻.
Thank you for having me, Eli. I appreciate the forum.
I hope I didn't botch your name too bad.
Close enough.
But we're trying. So tell us what it was like growing up as a young kid.
Well, my life and my childhood was a little different than most people's. We had some trials and tribulations between my parents. I read about that in the book. So my earliest remembrance is my mother leaving my father and taking us, the four children, my siblings and myself, across the country to sort of escape my father, get away from him. And it took several years for them to reconcile. So growing up young, I came from sort of a fractured family. My father was, dabbled in a lot of alcohol and cigarettes, had some vices, and wasn't really there as a great father. I mean, I'm sure he loved us, but he wasn't as supportive as some people have their fathers be. So I write about that as well. And I got through it okay, but I knew that if I ever had a family, I would do it a little differently.
Well, what was interesting in reading in your book, and boy, it's a page turner, right? You can't put that book down. You talked about you were playing baseball, and you talked about the fact that you actually had to find your way to the games by yourself. You never got a ride from your mom and your pop, and they actually never went to a game. And that kind of stuck with you for a long time. Tell us about that.
Well, I did play 10 years of organized baseball as a young person, all the way up to where I tried out for Division I college baseball. But all through Little League and Senior League and into high school baseball, my parents never once came to a single game. Like I said, my father drank quite a bit of his life away, spent a lot of time in bars, and forced my mother to be there with him. He would not let her drive. He refused to let her get a driver's license. So she couldn't have come see me even if she wanted to. So after a couple of years of that, I sort of just adapted and said, I'm going to toughen up. Baseball was my passion. I walked to practice every day, sometimes 3 or 4 miles in the rain and the heat. But it made me a stronger person, and it made me realize that there are some things I do different in my life when I grow up.
So you and I have something in common. We're both in the hospitality industry for many years. We worked with many restaurants, you and I together. Me more on the East Coast, you probably more in Colorado and in the West Coast there. And so tell us about how that all evolved.
Well, I left Florida right after graduating high school with ambitions of playing baseball at Arizona State University as a walk-on. That didn't work out too great. It was a phenomenal program, but I still had to pay tuition. So I worked in restaurants. I started as a dishwasher in a pizza joint and worked my way up to assistant manager within several weeks, actually, and then eventually general manager within months. So I had an affinity for it. I liked it. The money was pretty decent. College, after a couple of years, just wasn't the place for me. And I realized that I was good in the restaurant industry, and I focused all my time and energy in that. And from Arizona, I branched out to Southern California, where I sort of upped my game a little bit and got into more of the fine dining aspect, which then a twist of fate took me to Aspen, Colorado, where I began my venture with Mezzaluna Restaurant Group, started that company and opened Aspen Mezzaluna first in the mid 80s, 86-ish. And then we branched out and I went and opened Mezzaluna Beverly Hills, Mezzaluna Brentwood, which is the famous one for the fact that Nicole had her dinner there last night and Ron Goldman was an employee there. And then I opened the Monkey Bar, very famous place in West Los Angeles back in the 90s. Anybody who was around during that era knows of the Monkey Bar. So that was my adult life was in the entirety of my work profession was the restaurant business. I loved it. I had a great time at it. I seemed to be pretty good at it. And I continued to do it until I retired just recently.
So, where and how did you first meet Nicole Brown Simpson? And what attracted you to her? And how would you describe Nicole's personality?
Well, I met her in Aspen, Colorado in 1992. I just randomly saw her one day at the end of a glorious day of skiing across the sun deck where everybody hung out, après skiing. I instantly thought she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And there was just something about her that stuck out from that normal crowd. And I approached the table where she was sitting with a couple of lady friends of hers and was convinced I was going to meet her one way or another. And as fate would have it, the word mezzaluna came out of one of their mouths, and I saw my in and I butted into the conversation and injected myself and said, Mezzaluna, you're talking about my restaurants. And that was the way I met her. I knew instantly there was something different. She was just amazing. She told me she'd come to Aspen to get away from her abusive husband. She didn't mention his name or much about him. I invited her and her girlfriends in for dinner that night so I could hopefully get to know her a little better. They took me up on it. She brought the kids in who were with her, Sydney and Justin. She had brought them from California. After dinner, she approached me in the restaurant and asked me if I wanted to go out and have a drink and maybe do some dancing. And I thought that was a great way to get to know more about her, spend some time with her. So we did. And we had a wonderful night together. And by the end of the evening, she was leaving the next day to head back to California. We had made plans for me to see her and kind of pick up where we left off that evening when I got to California, which was my normal routine because of work. And Mezzaluna was right down the street from her residence on Gretna Green that she had just moved into post separation from OJ.
So, when and how did you actually realize that she was OJ's wife?
Well, she didn't mention it initially, but later that evening when we were out dancing, oddly enough, a friend of mine approached me at the table at the lounge we were at. Nicole was up dancing at the time, and he said, "Hey, man, that's O.J. Simpson's wife you're with." And I went, "Ah, okay, well, it all makes sense now. The ex-husband, abusive," because I had heard tales in the news about that. And she came back from dancing and sat down, and I mentioned it to her, and we almost had a little chuckle about it. And she said, well, I guess you know now the cat's out of the bag. And I said, oh, that's fine with me. You're getting a divorce, let's see where this takes us.
And so here you are dating one of the most beautiful girls in the entire world, someone who's obviously has fame, certainly married to an extremely famous person. Where did your confidence come from working in a restaurant to date into that sort of league? I don't know if I could have.
You know what? I ask myself that quite often, and I mentioned that in the book. She was out of my league, but I swung for the fences, and luckily I connected. I think she appreciated the fact that I was just a normal, down-to-earth guy who showed her respect and dignity. She hadn't had that. She met OJ when she was 18, and he sort of plucked her out of society and had her under his thumb for 15 or so years. She didn't get to grow up or experience a lot of things most of us do in our 20s. And she had it. I mean, she had had a rough time during that period of time. And she eventually told me all the stories. But I think when she met me, she said, this is a fun, carefree, maybe a little above average looking guy, but we just hit it off. Our personalities meshed. We like the same styles of music. We like doing the same stuff. And that's how it all transpired.
So in your book, you mention your Nicole's first real relationship after being married to OJ for 17 years. How long did you actually date her, and how did it break up?
Well, we met in January, like I said. So I came out to Los Angeles in March with plans of being there about 2.5 months. That was my normal routine. So we started dating immediately when I got there. We knew that we had some sort of connection from when we met in Aspen. We picked up right where we left off. we started dating, going out, doing the things that people do. It was a process when you're getting to know somebody. With that, getting to know her friends, her family, and along came the specter of O.J. Simpson and the stalking and the threats and the violence, and all that transpired over about a 2.5 month period until the final stalking event, which took place in Laguna one day when we both sort of just looked at each other as we were watching the sunset from the point in Laguna Beach and said, he's never going to let this happen. What do we do? And we just both agreed that I was getting ready to head back to Aspen. She was continuing to stay in Los Angeles. She said, let's just back off a little bit. Let's just continue this great friendship that we've formed and see where things take us. And maybe that will get the pressure off with OJ. Maybe he'll relinquish some of this control that he was trying to have over our relationship. So I went back to Aspen. She stayed in LA. We continued to talk daily, if not sometimes twice a day. She visited me numerous times over the summer, brought the kids. We had wonderful experiences, but basically as friends, as best friends. So much so that when I went back to Los Angeles in August of that year to start the build out on the Monkey Bar, she insisted that I move into her house. So for a 2.5, 3 month period of time, I lived in Nicole's house. The beauty of that period of time was it was football season. So he was gone. OJ was out
Yeah.
east doing his broadcasting thing, and we didn't have any of that stuff that we'd experienced during the romantic dating part of our relationship.
How much did the stalking really get to you personally? Um, and what kind of stalking are we talking about? And when did it first happen?
The first event was the second night I got to Los Angeles. I invited Nick down to the Mezzaluna in Beverly Hills for a big event that we did every Tuesday night. And some of her girlfriends knew about that event and were excited to come and have a table. Very hard to get into. So I said, bring your girls. I'll have a table for you. Thought it was a great opportunity to spend more time with her. So they did. They obliged and got him a beautiful table right up front. And remember, the windows are all glass in this restaurant. So you can see everything that happens out in the street, right where valet parking is. And almost instantly, up pulls a Bentley at a high rate of speed, slams on its brakes. He jumps out, comes in right to our table. He knew exactly where we were at and slammed his hands down and looked me right in the eye and said, I'm O.J. Simpson and she's still my wife. So to answer your question, the second night I was in town, and then it persisted every time we were in public, every time we were in a bar, a restaurant, a nightclub, he would show up. And other small things that I mentioned, lots of them in the book. If we were at home enjoying some quiet time together, maybe watching a movie, the minute we turned off the TV, phone would start ringing instantly. So we knew we were being watched either directly by him or someone he had paid to keep an eye on us. So he knew our movements.
Well, you have a teaser right in the front of your book, the first few pages, and you say, how OJ was watching Nicole make love to another man through her window.
That was me.
I guess we can guess who that man was, right?
That was
And
me.
how did you actually see him? Like, what was he doing?
Well, that was the most famous event because it was obviously highlighted in my grand jury testimony, and the prosecution had every every point of bringing that up in the trial. Turns out they didn't actually call me, even though I was under subpoena. But we had come home from a nightclub that night after realizing he was in there following us as well. We just went home, and it just happened to be the first night that we made love. It was 3 weeks or so into our relationship. We weren't trying to hurry things. I understood that Nick had not been with another man all those years. She was with OJ and it was new to her. All the experiences were new. So we were in no rush. It just happened organically that night. Unbeknownst to us, he's watching us through the window of her house the whole time. We didn't know. We were just doing what we were doing. I ended up leaving about 3 o'clock in the morning that night because I would never stay over all night long because of the children. She was very cognizant of that. So I left about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I remember that it was just such an eerily quiet night in Brentwood, walking down that long, dark sidewalk, leaving her house through a courtyard and a big iron gate down a sidewalk to the street where my car was parked. Got in my car and went home, just on cloud nine. I had just had the most wonderful evening with someone I was madly in love with. But what I want to mention is At the time, it didn't dawn on me, but if you look at the correlation, especially the geography of the two residences, Gretna Green, where this incident took place, the house Nick lived in then, and Bundy, the house where she was eventually murdered with Ron Goldman, he did the same thing the night he murdered them. He came through an iron gate in the back, down a long, dark sidewalk, bordered on both sides, around a corner to the open front living room window, very similar to what he did the night watching us through the window. Now, you flash forward to the next day after he watched us, and we still did not know until he just happened to show up at Nick's house while we were in one of the back bedrooms innocently. He burst through the door, confronted us angrily. I watched you. I saw you. How dare you? You know, he wanted to talk to her alone. I stood between them because I was fearful of what might happen. She had started to open up to me about other events that took place with him and violence and control. And she's holding my hand, trembling, standing behind me as he's getting angrier and angrier, and his eyes are growing darker. I watched that transformation in real time until finally she said, Keith, he's not going to leave until he has a couple of minutes alone with me. And she asked me if I wouldn't mind stepping outside the room, but stay close enough so I could hear. So I did. I stepped into the kitchen just off of the bedroom and tried not to listen to the words they were saying, but made sure I could hear if something bad happened. A couple of minutes of them in the bedroom arguing, him arguing at her. They came out. He walked out first, came right up to me, stuck his hand out with this half-hearted, hey, I'm O.J. Simpson, I'm a proud man kind of thing, and then left as quickly as he had arrived. Nick looked right at me, white as a ghost, and said, oh my God, Keith, he watched us last night. He watched everything we did. And we looked at each other. And from that point on, everything changed. We knew nothing was sacred. Nowhere was safe in our relationship. If you can't be safe in the privacy of your own home behind locked doors at 2 o'clock in the morning, where are you safe? So from that point on, we just watched everything and paid very close attention to our surroundings.
I got to tell you, Chris, Keith, if I was on a jury and I had just listened to what you had just said, I'd already be 80% sure that OJ was guilty. Why the heck did the prosecution not have you on this witness stand?
Well, here's what happened. I testified for the grand jury right away, 2 days after the funeral and Bronco chase, 2 or 3 days after. They were very adamant about focusing on domestic violence and stalking, which was me, which was all my evidence. They were going to make that a pivotal part of their case. They knew they had DNA evidence, blood evidence, all that kind of stuff, but they were hoping that the emotional part of the stalking would grab the jury, as you just mentioned. So they put me under subpoena. They told me to go home, go hide out, stay away from the media, which I had no interest in selling my story. But they said they'd call me back when the time was right. So they brought me back to be the first witness in the trial. They locked me up in a hotel room. They decided to put Denise Brown on first because she had some domestic violence testimony regarding the New Year's Eve 911 calls that Nick had told her about a beating. So they used Denise and her testimony drug on a little bit, but they got a lot out of her. So the way they described it to me was Marcia Clark looked at me and said, we've got some good stuff here. We want to save you to be the last witness in the trial. We want to open with domestic violence. We want to close with domestic violence because the jury is going to be bored in the middle with the minutia of DNA and blood evidence. So I said, great, I'll go home and hide out and wait. Now, remember, as a subpoenaed witness, you're not permitted to watch the testimony. So I did what I was told to do and did not follow the trial. So I was unaware of what was transpiring on a daily basis. I sort of got snippets of it here and there when I was out sometimes and knew that it's sort of turned to a racial-based sort of defense. The defense was pushing the race baiting thing. And I was fearful that that was going to hurt with that jury, especially the makeup of the jury, which I had seen in jury selection. So still hoping that they were going to use me at the end of the trial. When it got to the end, I think and kind of the way they described it to me is they were playing defense the whole time. Once the Mark Furman thing blew up in their face, they were on their heels. So they were no longer presenting their case as they originally planned, and they chose not to use me. Well, the caveat is the defense subpoenaed me. Now you tell me, what's that all about? F. Lee Bailey's on the phone with me numerous times, calling me, Keith, we're going to put you on tomorrow. Yeah, whatever. I hung up on him several times. They even subpoenaed me in Florida, where I was hiding out, as if to force me to go testify for them. When I walked into the court in Florida, I said, Your Honor, I go willingly. Put me on. And I looked into a camera and said, Mr. Bailey, put me on the witness stand. I wish they would have. They never intended to. That was a ploy by the defense in the court of public opinion to say, well, if he didn't kill this guy after watching him make love to his wife, how could he possibly have killed this other guy? Well, he didn't have the opportunity to kill me. And, it was a different time. But that's the one major regret I have about the trial. Well, two, considering he got found not guilty. The fact that I didn't get to contribute what I thought was very important to putting this guy behind bars for the rest of his life.
I'm going to ask you kind of a little bit of a controversial question. Do you think that based on the makeup of the jury, it was almost preordained that they were going to say he was not guilty, regardless of how this all would have played out, whatever evidence they would have had? Do you think that's part of the story?
In hindsight, 100%. In real time, I wasn't allowed to see kind of what was going on, but in doing a lot of research, mostly for this book, because I had to go back and I had to look at the evidence. I had to look at the jurors. I had to look at things that I couldn't watch in real time. So, and I did that objectively. What I did is I had a couple of journalists help me who were students of the trial, and I had them basically present me with all that evidence so I could look at it almost as a juror. I wanted to know what was going on in their head. And in doing that, I realized that there was no way you can exonerate this man based on the evidence. I was well aware of the racial animus going on in Los Angeles at the time. I lived through the riots. Nicole and I were actually in our romantic phase of our relationship during the LA riots, so much so that I stayed in her house for 3 nights to make sure her and the kids were safe. That's how scary it was in Los Angeles. So I knew how the community, the African-American community, felt about the police, about the district attorney's office. And I thought it was a huge mistake, as most people in hindsight agree with me, that Gil Garcetti should have never moved it to the venue downtown. Did it out of convenience. If that trial's in Santa Monica, OJ's still in jail if he's not dead. So I was concerned that they were going to disregard the evidence and vote with their hearts. And turns out I was 100% right.
In your fascinating book, Stalked, you mention that you had some regrets that perhaps if you had done things differently, things would have turned out differently. What are your thoughts on that today?
Well, I wish I could have protected Nicole more. When she told me she was going to try this ill-fated reconciliation with OJ, which ultimately cost her life, I wish I would have been more forceful in keeping her from doing that. But I think what I really wanted to do was let her be herself and grow. She had an 18-month period of time, Eli, where she had some freedom in her life between the separation and the reconciliation, where she got to make her own decisions. For the rest of the time, it was OJ's way or no way. So I wasn't about to tell her, don't do this, don't do that. I tried to advise her as a great friend and a former lover that I didn't think it was safe. But my regret is I couldn't do more to help her in that regard. And then, as we just discussed, that I couldn't do more after the fact to help her. A lot of times people don't even mention Ron Goldman. I mentioned in the book, I actually thank him for trying to defend Nicole, both her honor and physically, and paying with the ultimate sacrifice of his life. I think he walked into a no-win situation that night. And I'm convinced after the fact that there's a very good chance OJ thought that was me coming through the gate that night, that He remembered us. I mean, you all heard that 911 tape in October of 93. That's the last time I spoke to Nicole because of that event where he's kicking in the door, screaming my name, tearing up her phone book, tearing up all the pictures, threatening her. And that was a year after OJ had seen me. He hadn't seen me or talked to me for a year and still had that in his mind. That's how he felt about me. So, you know, Ron walked into something horrible, and I think OJ thought it might have been me. And certainly a lot of my friends and family, before Ron was identified that morning, thought it was me. My phone was ringing off the hook.
Well, your subtitle of your book, right underneath where it says stalked, it says it could have been me. And you make a pretty shocking revelation in the book. Um, and I'm kind of stunned why it wasn't talked about more. And that's, that OJ made the infamous phone call while he was in the Ford Bronco, with Al Cowlings. They're in the most famous chase in American history. And he then called the Bundy townhouse where Nicole lived, and he told the Brown family he was coming to finish what he started. What is your interpretation of that phrase?
Well, let's put this week in perspective quickly, and then I'll describe that. I'm in Atlanta on business when Nick's murdered. I get a phone call. I turn on the TV. It's a fact-finding mission the first couple hours. What happened? Oh my God. I call the family immediately. They asked me to come to Los Angeles to be a part of the funeral, to be a pallbearer at Nicole's funeral. I fly out immediately. I hadn't seen the family face to face because I flew into Los Angeles the night before the funeral, only several days later after the murder. First time I saw the family was at the funeral. So now I'm at the funeral for the woman I loved, always loved, and still do, holding her casket. I hadn't seen her or talked to her in 6 or 7 months because of the 911 phone call and that whole event that transpired. And OJ refused to let her speak to me. So I'm holding the casket of the woman I love, and out of the limo comes the guy who killed her and walks up and hugs every pallbearer except me. So that's the actions of a guilty man in my mind. I mean, I was convinced he did it initially anyway. 2 minutes later, the Brown family exits their limos, comes over to see me face to face for the first time. And the revelation there is Denise tells me that they were speaking of me the night Nick was murdered at dinner at Mezzaluna. She said she was going to surprise me. I didn't know if that meant a phone call or come see me, but she was finally free of OJ and she was going to get back in touch with me. So imagine my emotions. I lost the woman I love. I'm holding her casket. The guy who killed her is 2 feet away from me. And the family's telling me the woman I loved was thinking of me 2 hours before she was murdered. So now, to get back to your initial question, the next day is the Bronco chase. So after the funeral at Nick's family's house, we agreed that we were all going to meet at the Bundy condo the next day, start inventorying Nick's possessions, getting them out of there to a safe area. So I actually slept in a little bit that morning. I was staying 2 blocks away from her condo at my friend Ron Hardy's house. Slept in a little bit. I hadn't slept in 4 days since the murders. So I was a little late to the party. I was an hour or so later than they arrived. So they were there. Packing stuff up. I came in through the alleyway. The police knew who I was, so they let me through the barricades. As I was coming up the alleyway to the back of Nick's house, now this is before OJ was a wanted man. All that was going on behind the scenes, but no one knew. As I was approaching the Bundy townhouse, I hear screaming out of the top window of Nick's condo, and it's Denise. And she's saying, Keith, get out of here. Just leave. Just go, go, go. And I'm startled. I don't know what's going on. Ron Hardy repeats those phrases through the window. And I don't ask questions. I just turn and I head back down the alleyway back to Ron Hardy's house. Now, this is the era of pre-cell phones, basically. So there's no instant communication. I'm on pins and needles back at Ron's house, walking around the living room. What the hell is going on is what's going through my mind. Eventually, Ron shows back up and shakes his head and says, "Oh my God, dude. Just as you were walking up, OJ called the townhouse and said, I'm on my way over there to finish what I started." And we didn't know if that meant he was coming to kill me. He had just seen me the day before at the funeral, obviously. We didn't know if it meant he was coming to kill the Brown family. We didn't know if it meant he was coming to kill himself. As we're going through this all, we turn on the TV and bam, there's Gil Garcetti. OJ is now a wanted man. He's a fugitive from justice. He's on the run, be on the lookout. So now we realize everything that's going on, and we all know what happened with the slow Bronco chase. So that was my week. That was my 5 day period. And then 2 days later, I'm on the witness stand in front of the grand jury, spilling my guts out for them about all the stalking and violence. So crazy times.
So, Keith, what is your relationship like with the Browns and the Goldmans? And you're still in touch with them today?
I was never really too much in touch with the Goldmans. Ron, I did not know personally because I had left Mezzaluna several months before the murders. I was pursuing a business opportunity for myself in Atlanta, my own restaurant. So I was there looking for locations. So Ron was hired during that period of time. I knew the entire staff at Brentwood. I had hired and trained them, but not Ron. So I didn't have any personal knowledge of Ron. So to answer that question, I didn't have much communication during the trial with Kim and Fred Goldman. A simple hello and met them. I did sort of try to apologize, for Ron's murder, but the Brown family always very close. I attended numerous get-togethers and memorials for Nicole over the years. To this day, still in great contact with them. Even the custody trial, the third of the three major trials, the Brown family called me and asked me if I would please come out and help and testify against OJ in hopes of them retaining custody of kids. And that was them putting on that trial. It wasn't the state. It wasn't, the state putting up the money and hiring the lawyers. It was all on the Browns' dime. So I said, I was living in New York at the time. I said, I come willingly and, graciously. And I flew out and actually stayed in the Brown family house while we were going through the custody trial. Well, we all know he got granted custody of the kids. We had one last night to take them out to dinner. They were handed over to OJ the next morning, and I've not seen or talked to them since that day. Yeah, I believe he put a order of no contact in right away that I could not contact them, so I didn't.
I'm going to tell you something, Keith. I have an extremely large collection of books, thousands of them. Obviously, I do a lot of podcasts. I used to own one of the largest seminar companies in the world. Everybody sent me their books. I collected my own books. I was kind of one of those book geeks. Your book is right up there on one of those books that's just going to sit on my shelf and I'm going to reread. It is an incredible, fascinating page turner. Obviously, you're a part of one of the most infamous stories in history. And what inspired you to write this book, and why did it take 31 some odd years after?
Well, first of all, thank you for that, because as a first-time writer, someone who's never had experience in this genre, it was a bit of a work in progress. And what I tried to do is, most importantly to me, was I wanted to make it raw and emotional. I didn't want it to be polished, professional, contrived, so to speak. I wanted to take the reader on a journey, almost like a walking journal. I wanted them to feel like they were sitting on my shoulder as I was going through this. I wrote it linearly, so it's in chronological order, so it was easy to follow. It's short by most standards, but it's to the point and it covers a lot of the important information. So I waited all these years. I got a lot of offers early on, but they were offers from publishing houses and they wanted to write the story the way they wanted to write the story. I didn't want that. I turned them all down in the beginning. I didn't think about it for many years. And to be quite honest, I waited until he died. I didn't think it was safe to divulge some of this information that's in the book about OJ's prior behavior. There's no doubt in my mind, if he had read this book when he was alive, he would have had a very, very adverse reaction to it.
Keith, what would you like readers to walk away with after they read this book? And by the way, you do make a good point. It's not one of these Stephen King like books where it's like over 1,000 pages. It's a pretty easy read, and you don't want to put the pages down. So, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, another reason why I wrote this book is the issue of domestic violence. What has happened over the years is I've been reached out to more so since the advent of social media. It's much easier to find me from numerous women. I want to say hundreds, um, some short stories, some long stories, but mostly the same. In bad abusive relationships, they sort of looked at Nick and my shared experience and our story together, and took some solace in the fact that I tried to help her and I was there for her and tried to get her out of a bad situation, and they used that as strength. Some of them walked away from situations they were in and possibly saved their life, certainly saved abuse. And I've maintained friendships with several of those women, very deep, long lasting friendships over the years. And it meant a lot to me. So, as not even a secondary thought, as an equal part of the book, I wanted women to take something away from it, that in this day and age, there is much more of a support system out there. Thanks a lot to Nicole and her murder, it's more prevalent in society. People are more aware of the situation of domestic violence. So I wanted women who might be in that situation, who might be experiencing something similar, to understand that you can get away and that the behavior doesn't change, and it may lead to a very, very dark place. The ultimate, kind of thing like Nicole experienced. So take that opportunity, read the book, know that there's help out there, reach out and try to get out of that bad relationship and save your own life.
Isn't it fascinating, Keith, how over great tragedies, as sad as they are, they also provide great opportunities for triumph. And often people like yourself, go through the grief, go through the process, still have challenges, even 31 years later, yet you find a way to triumph and help other people through that process. So I want to congratulate you for that. And how do people get this book, and how do people connect with you?
Well, you can get it on Amazon directly. It's called Stalked, It Could Have Been Me. So use the whole title when searching for it, because come to find out, there's about 80 books on Amazon with the word stalked in the title. So don't want it to get lost in the shuffle. I do have a dedicated website for the book. I was unable to secure the title, it was taken. But the website is ojstalkedme.com, all one word. So you can type in ojstalkedme.com. It'll take you right to the book's website. It'll give you a synopsis of the book. It'll give you a bio on me. It'll tell you some more information. There's a couple of great picture reels on there. And more importantly, there's 2 direct links for you to click on and purchase the book directly from Amazon. So that's the easiest way. And I hope people reach out, read it, take something from it, and I hope it helps them.
Well, some people who are listening here are Gen Zers, and they're not as old as I am or you, Keith, and they didn't go to the trial like I did, and saw all the nuances. So if you actually haven't, gone through that trial and didn't live through it, I assure you this book is something that you're going to treasure. So go out and get the book Stalked. Thank you so much, Keith, for being on my show today.
I really appreciate the platform. Thank you for having me.